Okay, so we are live, and I have no idea how to turn this. Oh, wait, here we go. And there we go. Okay, so those of you who are tuning in, my name is Yoel Oz. I'll be giving the shiur tonight. We have a large enough crowd. Does everybody have a source sheet? Yeah. Okay. So I don't think we're going to be able to go around and do names, but the title for this shiur is called Kabbalah for Rationalists. Okay, so it seems that these two, mysticism and rationalism, don't seem to go with each other, and there's a lot of mystery when it comes to mysticism. And I think a lot of people who are coming from a more rational, logical, organized kind of thought are often sort of put off a little bit by Kabbalah. They don't know what it is. They don't know what the ideas are. It's are we creating a golem? Are we talking about past lives? Are we talking Kabbalah can go in many different directions. We'll talk about the different types of Kabbalah, what is meant by Kabbalah, what is meant by mysticism. But basically, I want to start off. This is sort of my own story. I'm sharing with you. Just tell you where I'm coming from. So I'm not coming as an expert or as a scholar in Kabbalah. I'm coming as a student, and I see this really as sort of us learning together. And my background is that I studied at Yeshiva University. I studied philosophy. I studied political philosophy. I'm actually also, I don't look it, but I'm half Yemenite, and my family background is connected to, if any of you know, Rav Kapach and the anti-Kabbalist worldview, or rather, I shouldn't say Rav Yichya Kapach, Rav Kapach, Yosef Kapach's grandfather was anti the Zohar, and that's, we can maybe touch on that a little bit later, but that is the Derech HaRambam. The approach of the Rambam, when we talk about rationalism, we generally mean the Rambam. We generally mean the path of Maimonides. And that kind of way of thinking. So that's where I'm coming from. So what I realized is, so I learned in Smicha at YU. I guess I went through, kindergarten all the way to the end. And there hit a point where it was like, I know nothing about Kabbalah. Nothing. They did not teach us a single thing. It's not part of the curriculum. I was a rabbi in a shul in America. I was a teacher in high school, and I really knew absolutely nothing. I knew I was afraid of it. I knew it was something that I sort of wanted to. It's like not just that I didn't know, but it was almost like I didn't want to know. Because I was scared of it in some ways. What exactly, it seems like, okay, people are doing magic, they're getting special incantations, and it was sort of like, okay, I'm a Rambamist, I'm a rationalist. This is not something that, speaks to me. I studied with students of Rav Soloveitchik and of students of Rav Lichtenstein, the typical sort of like, modern Orthodox educational background. So at a certain point, I realized I have a big gap in my knowledge. And so this is something that, at least simply to be educated, I should know. Let me just take off my watch so I keep track of the time. Sorry. That there's something that I need to know about this. Like, what is it? How can I be an educated Jew? How can I even be in the rabbinate without knowing anything about this? And I'll be honest with you, and you should be aware. Most of your rabbis, most of your teachers, they don't know anything about this. Some do occasionally, but it's not part of the curriculum. It's not something that is generally studied, at least not in modern Orthodox circles. It is sort of studied in an academic Jewish studies circle and world. And that's really sort of where I started. Okay, so basically, somebody asked, well, what do you mean by Kabbalah? So the question really sort of is, where do you start? Where do you even begin to start talking about mysticism, and where do you start talking about Kabbalah? So I really didn't know. And the first thing that I did was I picked up This is a famous work. It's called Major Trends in Jewish Mysticism by Gershom Scholem. This is sort of like the standard introduction to Kabbalah from the academic side. There are let's say there are different types of Kabbalah. There's the Madonna Kabbalah and the Kabbalah Center. There is the academic approach to Kabbalah. There is the Hasidic approach to Kabbalah. There's the Sephardi approach to Kabbalah. There are many different approaches, but Shalom sort of lays out the foundations from a historical standpoint. And he goes from the beginning, he starts going back to the Second Temple period. And most of what he's talking about are certain types of mysticism dealing with angels and dealing with what are called hechalot. The hechalot, we don't necessarily know what we're talking about when we talk about the palaces in heaven, but we actually are familiar with them, whether we're aware of them or not, through the liturgy of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And also some of you may know the piyut Anim Zemirot. So Anim Zemirot, there's a famous line, Dimu otcha v'lo chefi yeshcha v'yishavucha lefi ma'asecha. They dimu otcha, they imagine you, lo kefi yeshcha, not as you actually are, v'yishavucha lefi ma'asecha. And they made statements about you based on your actions. So, and if most of the time Anim Zemirot is said by some child or it's read through, but there will be lines in there, Kesher Tefillin Hera Le'anav. That it's based on an Agadah that God wears tefillin, and Moshe Rabbeinu saw the tefillin that Hashem was wearing, and it's like, this is really anthropomorphic kind of stuff. This is not your typical Rambamist stuff, but it's thrown into the liturgy, whether you're aware of it necessarily or not. A lot of particularly Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, a lot of the piyutim, a lot of the stuff that often you go through very quickly, is dealing with sort of like ascending through the different hechalot, the different areas in heaven. And so that's sort of, from a historical standpoint, that's the earliest strata of Jewish mysticism. But let's go back. So the word Kabbalah itself means something which is received. Okay, so in the Talmud, when something is called Divrei Kabbalah, it's referring to something that is halacha l'Moshe Sinai, or it's something that we received from previous generations in terms of halakha, meaning there's not necessarily a textual source for it, or there is, it's not something that there's a big debate or disagreement about. It's Divrei Kabbalah. That's not what Kabbalah that we're talking about is. Okay? Kabbalah at around the 1100s and the 1200s, Kabbalah started to get a different kind of name. Okay? And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about. And this is going to be a tricky question, because is Kabbalah something that all the way goes back to Sinai? Is it something that's, or even going back to creation? Or is there something that's chidush in there? Is there something that's new in terms of the revelation aspects of Kabbalah? And I think that these are the kinds of questions that rationalists are often going to ask. Where does this come from? What's the source of this? What exactly are we talking about? What are the frames of reference? Okay, so I said again, that question is sort of like, where do you start? So one place to start was with Shalom. Shalom gives the historical explanation. The second place, I had this book for many, many years. It's called Inner Space. I highly recommend it. I couldn't get myself, I looked at the table of contents. The first chapter is Kabbalah and prophecy, God and man, the universes, the Sphirot, Keter, etc., etc. I bought it maybe when I was in yeshiva. I'm now 43. I got it when I was about 18, 19. I didn't open it until I was about 35, 38, or something along those lines. I was scared of this book. But this book is sort of like, I would say, if you really want to get the keys to unlocking the world of Kabbalah and Chassidut, this is it. And I later became a student of the editor. This was based on the lectures of Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan. Rabbi Kaplan's student, Rabbi Avraham Sutton, is someone who I have the privilege of knowing, and he's someone. I'll say one of the things that attracted me to Kabbalah was, and it's hard to give this over, but like there's a light that shines on this man. I cannot describe it, but there have been like events with him. There was a Tu B'Shvat Seder a week and a half ago or so, and there's just something that that he has that is attractive. Where is that coming from? And I remember I was sitting with him in his study once, and he just had a cup of water, and the way he made the bracha, a shahakol on a cup of water, I was just like, it wasn't like a baruch. There was an intention, and it was very serious, but it wasn't like overwhelming, there was something. And I said to him, you sold me when you made that bracha on the cup of water. And he said, that didn't just happen. I didn't just make a bracha on the cup of water. That's something that I've worked on for years and years in my life. And that's sort of, when you talk about Kabbalists and when you talk about Hasidic masters, or, there's something, it's experiential. And I think that that's also really important in that we're talking about Torah Shebaal Peh in a very, very real sense. There are certain things that you can give over in books, but there are certain things that you can only really give over in a face-to-face, one-on-one or a classroom or personal one-on-one capacity. Excuse me. Okay, so really, again, so the question is, where do you start? So one is Shalom, the historical standpoint. The other is Kaplan, which is giving you the terms, the terminology, the concepts. When I first started reading Kaplan, it was like, oh my God, I'm learning a new religion. I didn't know any of this stuff. Talking about the olam of Atzilut and Yitzira and Bria, Yitzira, Asiya, and then all of the Sfirot, and then it gets really crazy in anthropomorphic stuff when it comes to what are called Partsufim. I'm not going to be even touching or scratching the surface of any of that right now. But what I do want to say is that that sort of just scratching the surface is one of the things that I find fascinating about Kabbalah. All of the later works of Kabbalah, they're always called sha'arim or hakdamot. Everything that you do, you're just scratching the surface, because what we're talking about the infinite, we're talking about the Ein Sof, we're talking about the universe, we're talking about things that we can't even begin to contemplate. And so, So when you're coming into this, again, from the rationalist perspective, it's like, I want to understand this. I want to go in deeper, but it's a lot. And that question of where do you start? So really, to me, the places to start are with Kaplan and with Shalom. The other book, Inner Space was published in 1990 after Rabbi Kaplan died. He died tragically at the age of 48. In 1983, but this was published in his lifetime. It's called Meditation in Kabbalah, and this also gives you sort of a historical. He deals with the issue of meditation, which we're not really going to get to address very much tonight. But he goes through a historical approach to Kabbalah. He talks about the period of the Talmud, the period of the Hechalot. The Mekubalim of Tzvat, and you will notice that there was one text that I skipped, and it's called the Zohar, which some of you may have heard of, and this is my prop. This is how big the Zohar is. So whenever I talk about the Zohar, I want people to understand just how enormous the work is. And the question is, where did the Zohar come from? So that's one of those things. Rabbi Kaplan takes a traditional religious point of view that it's from the period of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, which is the period of the Tanaim. The scholars take the position that it's a product of the 1200s, the late 1200s in Spain. The approach that I take is, even according to those who say that it's from the period of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and I think it's certainly inspired by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and the stories of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in the Talmud and in rabbinic literature, it was hidden for 1,000 years. So it was not known. Okay, so the Zohar it appeared mysteriously in the late 1200s, and there was a figure, Rabbi Yitzchak of Akko, who went to meet Rabbi Moshe de Leon, who was the person who was said to have received the Zohar and copied it, and he was going to show it to Rabbi Yitzchak of Akko, and then Rabbi Moshe de Leon died, and the history of the Zohar it's a fascinating story. How it was actually written, and was it written in a mystical state? Was it written? Again, it's this huge book, and it almost comes out of nowhere. And it's not just one book. It would be more appropriate to call it Zoharic literature. There's the regular Zohar, which is basically a midrash on the Torah. It's a midrash hasod, or secret or the mystical midrash on the Torah. And then there are other parts. There's what's called the Tikkunei Zohar, which are later just sort of excurses, and there's Zohar Chadash, which is another section of the Zohar. Even according to those who say that it's from Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai did not write it because it's quoting Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Meaning he's the hero, and his circle, the people behind him, are the ones who are they're the ones who are living the story of, and this is a loving story. That's a very important part of it. That the style of Midrash, the style of the Zohar, is a style of overflowing love. And so whatever position you take on the origins of the Zohar, it's a remarkable work. And the truth is, according to all opinions, we really don't know a lot about it or how it came to be. And that's part of the mystery of mysticism. A lot of these things, are sort of like, we don't really understand how these things come about. So that's going back to where do you start? So, okay, there's the historical side, there's the topical conceptual side, there's, but to me, the key thing that when we're talking about mysticism, that I think, is sort of like the key thing. It's sort of like, it's something that's kind of like out there. Where do you start? It begins with prophecy. Okay? So prophecy, religion, even if you're a rationalist, even if you're a Rambamist, you still believe in the prophets, you still believe in revelation at Sinai, you still believe in this possibility of the divine communicating with humanity. Angels are clearly, part of Tanakh. They visit Abraham. They appear in the Midbar. They appear to Yoshua. They appear in the Shoftim. Angels, they're also sort of like, what are these figures? The Maimonideans have a different kind of interpretation of what angels are, but it's also sort of like this. There's God, and then there's this sort of intermediary world, and prophecy sort of falls in this realm of, okay, there's something out there in the infinite, and then there's something that we receive, or some kind of enlightenment, or some kind of enlightenment is a good word, because it means literally something that brings light upon you. So that's gonna be where I'm gonna start. So if you look at your source sheets, does anybody need a source sheet? Okay, yeah. Okay. Anybody like to?
There's a spare one in here. We can
Okay. Anybody like to read the first three sources? We can read it in Hebrew for people who are looking online. We'll translate them into English. Anybody like to read? Don't all jump at once.
וישארו שני אנשים במחנה שם האחד אלדד ושם השני מדד ותנח עליהם הרוח והימה בכתובים ולא יצאו אליה ויתנבאו במחנה. Two of the participants, one Eldad, the other Medad, had remained in the camp, yet the Spirit rested upon them. They were among those recorded, but they had not gone out to the tents, and they spoke in ecstasy in the camp. Vayaretz הנער ויגד למשה ויאמר אלדד ומדד מתנבאים במחנה. The assistant ran and told Moshe, saying, Eldad and Medad are acting the prophet in the camp. ויאמר לו משה, המקנא אותה לי, ומי ייתן כל עם השם נביאים, כי ייתן השם את רוחי אליהם. But Moshe said to him, are you wrought up on my account, or that all of God's people were prophets, that God put the divine spirit upon them?
Okay, so the story here is it's in Parshat Bahalotcha, and Moshe. It's one of the early scenes where Bnei Israel are complaining to Moshe, and he doesn't know what to do with them, and he turns to God and he says, did I give birth to these people? How am I supposed to carry their burden all by myself? And Hashem says to Moshe, gather 70 elders. I didn't bring this quote, and I'm going to take from the ruach, from the spirit that's upon you, Moshe. You think that you don't have enough spirit. I'm going to take the spirit that's upon you, and I'm going to give it to them, to the Shivim Zikanim. And in the Shivim Zikanim, it also says that the ruach of Hashem falls upon them, and that they also receive the gift of prophecy. And then, afterwards, these two figures, Eldad and Medad, continue to prophesy. Rashi has a very interesting, I'm not going to get into it, but Rashi has a very interesting interpretation of what it is that Eldad and Medad were prophesying. And the Na'ar, interpreted as Yehoshua, comes and says to him, these two people, they're out of control. And so Moshe says to this, Hamikaneh atali? Are you, you're being zealous for me? Mi yitain kol am Hashem neviim. If only everybody can be a navi. Yitain Hashem et rucha aleim. Everybody should feel the spirit of Hashem falling upon them. So that's sort of this idea that, Ruach Hashem falls upon people. That nevuah is connected. It's not just about seeing the future or it's about really having Ruach Hashem. It also seems to have this content of what's going to happen in the future, but it's not limited to that. Okay, so that's Nevuah sort of as it appears in the Torah, and that Moshe Rabbeinu, the Torah is saying, Nevuah should be for everyone. It's not just for me as a Navi, as a prophet. Really, everyone should have it. And so this is a remarkable thing because this is also the vision of Acharit Hayamim. This is the vision of the Messianic period. And this is from the next section, which is from the book of Yoel, the 3rd chapter. Does anybody like to read? Huh? Translate.
After that, I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and daughters shall prophesy. Your elders shall dream dreams, and your youth shall see visions. I will even pour out my spirit upon male and female slaves in those days.
Right, so Nevuah, the vision of Nevuah is that this is something that's going to come back. It's not just something that happened once upon a time. So, in terms of this question of Kabbalah, it's not just something that's kind of this abstract question, but it's sort of still relevant to each and every one of us today. What does this mean? What are we going to experience? Are we going to experience this? What exactly is going to happen in the Messianic period? And those of us who are rationalists are like, what in the world is going on here? And can I even handle, these kinds of things. I'm going to talk about towards the end. So I start off with Nevuah. The first book that I recommend on Nevuah is also Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, called Meditation in the Bible, where he talks about the practices he basically goes through portions in Tanakh, practices that the prophets went through, which they call hitbodedut, and later on some kinds of meditation, some kind of where they would get into an ecstatic trance or an ecstatic state of some sort. And prophecy wasn't something that just, fell upon people. Although that's an interesting question. Is prophecy something that you have to prepare yourself for? Is this something that, God just, puts on someone? There are no clear answers to these questions, but these are the questions. Sorry?
There are, though. Like Bilam, he says that he needs to go to sleep and everything.
Right. So in Chazal, there are all types of different interpretations.
Shal said that he needs to have the singer and everything.
Exactly. Yes, you're absolutely right. So there are different statements and different. It's not a consistent. It's not a consistent thing. Moshe, his nevuah is considered to be of stature that's not like any other.
But he was also separated from his wife.
That's also an important component in terms of what kind of spiritual preparation or what kind of spiritual state you need to be in. Absolutely. So nevuah is sort of I think at the sort of around this whole topic, and so I started off with the where to begin, which is Rabbi Kaplan. I'm sort of skipping ahead, but this is a work called Kol HaNevuah. It was written by Rabbi David Cohen, who was known as the Nazir. He was a Talmid Muvhak of Rav Kook. He edited Rav Kook's major works called Orot HaKodesh. Very, very important works in Jewish philosophy, and it's sort of taking ideas in Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism and translating them into a modern idiom. And again, all of Rav Kook, it's Orot and Orot this, and it's all about light. Light. Even his name, Ra'aya, means to see. Kook in Yiddish means give a kick, take a look. Means it's all about using your eyes. The irony is that the Nazir calls it Kol HaNevuah. He calls it Hahigayon HaIvri HaShim'i. The logic, the Hebrew logic, the oral with an AU, that the logic, and he goes through the Talmudic logical process, the philosophers, the Kabbalists, and then he takes Rav Kook and Ramchal before Rav Kook, the Ramchal, and he's sort of like, it's part of this sort of, we know that Rav Kook was seeing the return of the Jewish people to Eretz Yisrael as a messianic movement. For the Nazir, it was not just that, it's bringing Mashiach, but Nevuah's coming back. And that we've got to start preparing ourselves for Nevuah. And he lived his life, he's known as the Nazir. He wasn't a halachic Nazir, but he took the customs of Nazirut, of being of a monastic lifestyle. He didn't. He was a vegetarian. He didn't cut his hair. He was a saintly figure. He was a very interesting figure within the school of Rav Kook's Talmidim, because he was the only one who had a secular university education. And if you go through his book, you see like quotes, from things in Greek and Latin and German, and he's a fascinating person. But when it came to like his personality, he was also the most we think about people who are involved in secular studies, they're involved in the world. He was actually the exact opposite. He was, the most sort of in the, dealing with the ideas of the heavenly spheres would be a way to put it. So, meaning we start out with Nevuah, and then when we get to the Nazir, it's sort of like that's the direction that we're going. So I think Nevuah is a very good place to understand what we're talking about when we're talking about mysticism. And what I want to talk about, though, is the difference between the mystic and the philosopher and the Talmudist. So here's the question, okay? So let's say, you have a mystical experience, then what?
Depends.
Huh?
Depends.
Right. So the difference between, I'd say, mystics today or people involved in Kabbalah, and this is also the true with regards to how you study the Zohar versus, let's say, how you study the Talmud or a philosophical text, is that question. It's that critical questioning capacity saying, wait a second, what is going on here? What does this mean? What is the source? You ask the question, well, okay, we have prophets, it says that they acted in this way in order to get prophecy, so it's asking the questions that it's a critical questioning capacity, which is in Judaism absolutely encouraged in terms of Talmudic thinking, halachic thinking. But when we get to things like Agadah or Midrashim, it's sort of like, okay, we kind of just like say, that's a nice Midrash or that's a nice Agadah. If I don't understand it, I don't understand it, and we move on. Or maybe we find something interesting in it. And I think that that's part of what's going on with the rationalist versus the philosopher and the mystic. It's this very question of asking questions and what can you teach. So we've gone through all of this. We've spent about 35 minutes. We're doing pretty okay on time. Now we got to answer the first question, which is, are we allowed to even be talking about this in the first place at all? All right, so, gave a whole long introduction. Now let's get to halacha. Let's get to a Gemara, famous Gemara in Masechet Chagiga. Anybody like to read? Wow, come on.
Can I be volunteered?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. I'll just read it in English
Okay.
because of the things.
Okay.
The added thing. One may not expound the topic of forbidden sexual relations before 3 or more individuals, nor may one expound on the act of creation and the secrets of the beginning of the world before 2 or more individuals, nor may one expound by oneself the design of the divine chariot, a mystical teaching with regard to the ways God conducts with the world, unless he is wise and understands most matters on his own. Mishnah continues in the same vein. Whoever looks at foreign matters, it would have been better for him had he never entered the world. Anyone who reflects upon what is above the firmament and what is below the earth, what was before creation and what will be after the end of the world, and anyone who has no concern for the honor of his maker, who inquires into and deals with matters not permitted to him, deserves to have never come to the world.
Okay, so this is a pretty intense statement. So it starts, okay, Ein dorshin ba'arayot b'shlosha. Okay, so you don't talk about intimate matters, with more than 2 people. But then it's like, okay, let's talk about, once we're talking about intimate matters, let's start talking about intimate religious matters. So Maaseh Bereshit, you don't do even with 2. And Maaseh Merkava, you only can teach it to 1 student at a time who has reached the level where they can understand things on their own. Okay, so not only that, all right, so what is this Maaseh Bereshit? What is this Maaseh Merkava? We don't know. And then we have this other thing, Kol HaMistakel Ba'arba'a Dvarim. Okay, these 4 things, better that he should have been born. Malamala, Malamata, Malifnim, Malachor, Those are philosophical questions. So it's not just like, we're asking the philosophical, the mystical questions. Can we talk about that? Can we just ask, where did the world come from? Can we ask, what's in outer space? What's, again, they're taking from the perspective of Malamata, what's underneath the earth. There's a certain kind of like, Tamim tiyeh im Hashem Elokecha. Don't ask too many questions. And that seems to preclude the study both of philosophy and Kabbalah. So that's sort of the starting out point. Obviously, there have been centuries worth of Jewish philosophical and Kabbalistic studies. So, and today everything is pretty much available. You can go online, you can go to a library, you can read whatever you want. And that's sort of the heter that is given. Rabbi Kaplan, in this book particularly, where he translates for the first time some certain mystical texts, and he says that he doesn't say who his teachers were that he received permission from, But he says, Bershut Morai v'Rabotai, that the idea is basically because figures like Sholem and the academics, are already putting everything out there, and you have the Kabbalah Center, the Philip Bergs and the Madanas who are talking about Kabbalah. At least, we should have, what is quote unquote frum or kosher or authentic Kabbalistic study. So that's sort of the way. And then when it comes to what came before and what came after, so that's, today we think of those things in terms of scientific questions, historical questions. And again, that's part of these are the questions. Can we study these things? Should we study these things? And then the next Gemara is also a very famous Gemara. Somebody like to read it? You want to do it again, or is
I love this Gemara.
Okay.
ארבעה נכנסו לפרדס, אחד הציץ ומת, אחד הציץ ונפגע, אחד הציץ וקיצץ בנטיות, אחד נכנס בשלום ויצא בשלום. בן עזה הציץ ונפגע, בן זמה הציץ ומת, אחר הציץ וקיצץ בנטיות, מני אחר, אלישע בן אבויה, Rabbi Akiva נכנס בשלום ויצא בשלום. Four entered the garden, which is known as Pshat Ramaz Drush Rasod.
Well, it's a pardes. It's an orchard.
Yeah.
Later on, we interpret it. We give an explanation of what pardes stands for. But I one time described how I was studying the Zohar, and I felt like I was wandering around, lost in a forest. I'm like, no, it didn't feel like a forest because there was this pleasant smell about it. I didn't understand what in the world was going on. I said, it's an orchard.
You mean your sense of smell wasn't affected from the Cheded Zedah?
Well, there was something about it that I didn't understand what was going on. I was lost, but there was something very pleasant about it. Whereas sometimes when you're in the Talmud and you don't understand anything, the Bavli calls itself darkness. That the Babylonian Talmud is filled with darkness. The Yerushalmi is more clear. It's more like there's more light. Eretz Yisrael. Anyway, that's a separate. That's something else. But yes, go ahead.
One peaked was heard. I'm just going to say crazy because that's the usual interpretation. One peaked and died. One peaked and cut saplings, which means that he no longer kept Torah. And one entered in peace and left in peace. But now as I peaked and went crazy. Then Zayma peaked and died. Achar peaked and he ended up doing things. He's also known as Elisha ben Avuya. And Rabbi Akiva entered in peace and left in peace. Okay,
so how are we doing in terms of percentage-wise?
A quarter. Potentially. Because Meir still learned from Elisha ben Avuya.
Right, that's true. But the rewards seem to be great. The statement of Rabbi Akiva, Nichnas b'shalom v'yatza b'shalom, doesn't say what happened while he was inside. Was he b'shalom? He went in b'shalom and he managed to get out also. But it doesn't say what happened exactly once he was inside the Pardes. But, it's 1 out of 4. So studying Kabbalah, I wouldn't say it's for everyone. Although, if we're going to be saying that everybody's going to be prophets... Okay, yes, question.
Everyone at that time was a prophet because it was Bamidbar, so everyone was there for Sinai. So everyone was there for the revelation. So everyone was.
They experienced prophecy for that moment, but later on.
They're all prophets.
But there's this sort of this going down. One of the things that I often say to people, they're like, if only God spoke to me, or if only I saw miracles with my own eyes, then I would believe. And
then
it's
you also wouldn't have free will, which means that it ruins everything.
So put free will aside for a second. I say, what are you talking about? Bnei Israel went through the sea. They literally heard God speaking at in the mountain, and 40 days later they were worshiping the golden calf. So don't tell me that miracles and revelation are going to be enough to make me believe.
But they saw it in the Merkava.
And yet they still sinned.
No, they saw it in the Merkava. They saw the calf in the Merkava, and that's why they thought it's a perfect intermediary.
That's an interesting...
I learned it in Chabad.
You learned it in Chabad. Okay, we can talk about Chabad a little bit later.
So you can't say that it's because of the Rambam.
It's interesting. That I'm not familiar with, but it's something.
It's one of the animals.
Very interesting. Okay, so those are the sources regarding, can you study these things? So now the question for me is, the rationalist sort of is, and this is also as a Talmudist, Ilan, what are your sources? What are the sources of Kabbalistic, of mystical traditions? So really, the three sources we're going to talk about, one is called Sefer Yetzirah, the second is called Sefer HaBahir, and the other we talked about the Zohar. The Sefer Yetzirah is attributed to Avraham Avinu. Sefer HaBahir is attributed to the Tana Rabbi Nechudia ben Akana. The Zohar is attributed to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. The key term, when I'd say as a rationalist approaching these things, is hamiyuchas. Okay? Meaning, like, pshat does not necessarily have to be that Avraham Avinu absolutely wrote Sefer Yetzirah. You can say that maybe some of the ideas were there, or it's inspired by Avraham Avinu, or we don't know the origins of Sefer Yetzirah. We know that it appears in the Talmud, that two of the Amoraim, there's a story about how they used Sefer Yetzirah to create a cow, and they shechted the cow, and they would eat from this cow on Shabbos, which is a pretty wild story. And Sefer Yetzirah is sort of the oldest and the most authentic and accepted even by the non-Kabbalists as being an authoritative text, but nobody knows what it's talking about. And that's part of also, same goes with the Sefer HaBahir, and we're gonna see just sort of some of the tidbits to understand what's the foundations of the Kabbalistic universe. All right, you've read a lot. Somebody else.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
ב-32 נתיבות פעילות חוכמה חקק יב
י"ק ו"ק.
י"ק ו"ק צבאות אלוקי ישראל אלוקים חיים ממך העולם אל שדי רחום וחנון רם ונישא שוכן עד מרום וקדוש שמו וברא את עולמו בשלושה ספרים
בספר וספר וסיפור.
בספר וספר וסיפור. 10 ספירות, בלי מה ב-22 אותיות יסוד, 300 ו7 גבולות ו12 פשוטות.
Okay, so ב-32 נתיבות פליאות חוכמה, so there are these 32 פליאות חוכמה, the 32 paths. So what are the 32 paths? The 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet and the 10 numbers. Okay, so there are so many commentaries on Sefer Yetzirah and so many commentaries just on this very first Mishnah. And it's chakak, okay, that Hashem engraved. It uses the name Yud-K, and then Yud-K Vav-K, and then Tzvakot of the hosts, Elokei Yisrael, the God of Israel, Elokim Chayim, the living God, the King of the world, Kel Shakai, V'Rachum, V'Chanun, Rami, etc., etc., etc. Uvara et Olamo, and that's how God created the universe. B'Shlosha Sfarim, in 3 Sfarim, B'Sefer, Usfar, V'Sipur. These 3 terms, Sefer, Sfar, and Sipur, these are sort of where Kabbalah all go from here. This is the foundational Mishnah. What is Sefer, Sfar, and Sipur? We don't know. Next, Eser Sfirot Blima. So in some texts, Blima is one word, but it's 10 Sfirot, or 10 digits of nothingness. Shalosh Imot, V'Sheva Kfulot, U'Shneimesrei Pshutot. The rest of Sefer Yetzirah keeps going on like this. It says there are 5 like this, and there are 5 like that, and we don't know what it's talking about. It's clearly written in code. It's clearly not meant to be taught as the Gemara that we saw in Chagiga said. It's not supposed to be taught in public. It's not supposed to be taught except to someone who already knows how to learn and understand these things. But these are, you're already just sort of, you're getting a glimpse. You're getting a peek. So these Rabbi Sadia Gaon has a commentary on Sefer Yetzirah. Rabbi Sadia Gaon just refers to the Eser Sfirot as referring to the 10 digits, the 10 numbers, 22 letters of the alphabet, 10 digits. This is how, through letters and alphabet, it's still mystical. It's still pretty out there, but it's not the content of Sfirot as we tend to think of it today. The first source, yes, please, go ahead.
Didn't the concept of digits only really start with like within the Muslim world, around the Middle Ages?
It's a good question. I mean, I know the philosophy of math deals a lot with these questions. I mean, I think you'll see this. I don't know if it's in the sections. Yeah, that over here in the Bahir. Basically, we start doing math with our fingers. The Muslims, I think, invented or whether they invented it or who the concept of zero. But the concept of ayin and ein sof, these are all Kabbalistic terms and concepts as well. So, but I think from I remember, when my daughter was growing up, I was trying to see how we could how she was philosophizing, quote unquote, digits and counting, and we start counting based on the fingers we have. That's how we count. But that doesn't mean that's base 10. Mathematics doesn't have to be in base 10, but math can be in other systems. I'm not a mathematician. I don't know anything about this, and I don't know what I'm talking about. But, so I have heard that in theory of mathematics, this is the case. But basically, the very simple way we do arithmetic, the way we start it, is with our fingers. And you'll see in a second that that's exactly what Sefer HaBahir. The Sefer HaBahir also is one of these texts that appears, we're not really sure from where. There are theories that it's from the 8th century, the 9th century, all the way up to the 12th century. It clearly was in existence in the 1100s. Ramban and other Mikubalim in Spain and Provence were familiar with the Bahir. The Bahir is a very short work, and it's very cryptic. It's in the Bahir that we first come across the concept of the Sfirot as we tend to associate with them in general Kabbalistic literature. Anyone else? Feel free. Okay, Ba'asara Babarot, I'll read it. Ba'asara Babarot shenivra bahen ha'olam. Okay, it uses the term that we know. There's a famous teaching in Pirkei Avot that God created the world through 10 utterances, 10 sayings. So the Babarot here, Umay Nihu, or what are these? Hainu Torat Emet Shekol Lelet Kol Ha'olamim. This is Torat Emet that contains all of the world. Okay, Umay Have.
This is worlds.
Olamot, worlds, Olamim, right. Shoresh Ha'ilan, Amar Le, it is the roots of the tree. What is this tree? Okay, the Shoresh Umay Have Ilan, Amar Le Kochotav Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ze Al Gam Ze, V'hein Domin LaIlan. So it's the powers of some sort of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and they are built one on top of the other. What is this talking about? Okay, continue on in the Sefer over here. Umay tama b'nesiut kapayim v'livarech lehon b'vracha. What was the purpose of Birkat Kohanim with the 10 fingers? Ela mishum de'it b'yadayim eser etzbaot. Because in the Birkat Kohanim, we have the 10 fingers. And what are the 10 fingers? Remez la'eser sfirot shebahem nechtimu shamayim va'aretz. This is a hint to the 10 sfirot through which the heavens and the earth were sealed or created. The otam ha'asara keneged aseret hadibrot. These are also keneged the 10 commandments. Uvichlal otan yud nichlalu taryag mitzvot. In these 10, all of the 613 mitzvot are included. Okay, we're getting out there now. Okay, the Amai going next. The Amai Kari Le Sfirot. Why do we call them Sfirot? Mishum dichtiv hashamayim misaprim kivod el. That the heavens misaprim, they tell the story of the glory of God.
I can read it if you like. I can read it if you like.
Okay, so we're now getting into this sort of like hints at what this spherotic universe is. Do you want to read the next one?
כן. ומהווה קדוש קדוש קדוש, ואחר כך השם צבאות מלוא כל הארץ כבודו, אלא קדוש כתר עליון, קדוש שורש האילן, קדוש דבק ומיוחד בכולם, השם צבאות מלא כל הארץ כבודו.
Okay, so let's just explain this. What is it that it says Kadosh, 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 the holy, 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 and then Hashem Tzvakot Melo Chol Haaretz Kevodo, that the entire world is filled with His glory? What it is saying that is, what is Kadosh? Keter Elyon. So that's the first of the Sphira. The first Sphira is called Keter. Keter is at the top. And later on, there is Keter. Part of Hashem is Keter separate from Hashem. What is Keter? This is a crash course in Kabbalah. If we were going to do this seriously, we would have to do a whole thing just on Keter. Okay, so but already you're seeing in Sefer Ba here the first Sphira, the Sphira of Keter. Keter is at the top of the tree, the Ilan. We've probably seen the picture of the 10 Sphirot as they come down. This is the source. These are the earliest sources in writing of these Sphirot. They are later developed in the Kabbalistic literature in Spain, leading up to the appearance of the Zohar, mostly connected to different names of Hashem. Which Sphira is connected to which name of Hashem? So Keter is connected to the name Ehyeh. Tiferet, which is at the center, is connected to the name Yud Kei Vav Kei. Chesed, which is on the right, is Kel. Gvura on the left is Elokim. I'm just introducing the language. Okay, so this is sort of like in terms of the rationalists, mysticism, Kabbalah for rationalists. Very beginning it's a whole different language. It's almost like I would say almost like a different religion. It's not a different religion, it's the same religion, but it's another level in Judaism that requires a certain level of study and that most people don't know. But that doesn't mean that you can't ask questions along the way. And that's sort of where I take the approach when I say Kabbalah for rationalists. There is a beauty. There is an incredible amount there that is just loving and filled with light, But there's also some stuff out there that's a little demons and angels and things that magic and stuff that like if you're a modern Orthodox rationalist scientifically trained type of person, you're like, this is a little out there for me. So, can you? And again, we looked at the statement of the Arba Shenichnasu Lapardes. One became a heretic, one died, and one went insane. So there's a lot here. Rabbi Akiva clearly, and Rabbi Akiva is the one to whom Sefer Yetzirah probably is correctly attributed to. But today, are we all going to become prophets? How are we going to become prophets? These are all really great questions. The question that we often have to ask is sort of like, what is the source? So this is the final text. Somebody else want to read? This is what's called Pitichat Eliyahu, yeah?
Unto the Afikas Asar Tikunin, Vekarinan Lon, Asar Sefiran, and Haga, the Mon Almans, Simen, the Law is Galyan, the Alman is Galyan.
Okay, so the Zohar is filled with the philosophy of the 10 Sfirot and the Olamot, which I haven't talked about, and Partsufim, which I also haven't talked about. But there is one section in the Tikkunei Zohar which sets it all out, where it describes what the system is. I didn't put the next part, which is the actual 10 Sfirot, but I just wanted you to see Patach Eliyahu. What's the source? Eliyahu Hanavi.
This is what a lot of people say in davening for.
Right. This is a
for
famous.
Friday.
Yes, there are those who recite it once a week. The Petichat Eliyahu. So what is Petichat Eliyahu? Petichat Eliyahu says what the 10 Sfirot are, but it starts out De'an tuchad v'lo b'chushban. You are one, but you are indivisible. You can't count. We can't count you. So again, we're talking as there's Sfirot, but chad v'lo b'chushban. He's understand that. Ilah al kol ilayin, higher than all. Stima al kol stimin, but blocked. Late machshava tfisa b'chlal. Our minds can't even begin to fathom you. Onto the apikat aser tikkunin. So these, but then, and this is where the Kabbalah says, okay, we don't understand anything. You're all right, but you gave us these 10 Sfirot. So this is sort of the hishtalshalut, the kind of the going down, and this is where I would say there's a big difference between the Maimonideans and the Kabbalists. Is that the Maimonideans will say, no, we don't talk about these things. We only, when it comes to God, we can only talk about what's mentioned in the Torah, specifically like the Yud Gimel Midot Harachamim, or specific statements about God's nature. But everything else is negative theology. We can't talk about God at all. The Zohar, the Kabbalists, they say, no, we have these things through which God brought together the world, and we call them Eser Sfiran, and it is through these 10 Sfirot that the hidden worlds and the revealed worlds are all operated and processed, and I don't know what the right word is. Hashpah.
That's how I learned it with.
Right. Okay. So thank you very much. Okay. So again, like one of the difficulties that you have with Kabbalah is, let's say you take the Arizal. What is the sources of the Arizal's philosophy of Tzimtzum, which is a contraction, Shirat HaKilim, and things that a lot of it is based on cryptic sections of the Zohar, but some of it is, what was his source? His source was Eliyahu Hanavi. Okay. So again, the rationalist side of my brain is like, how am I supposed to process that? So going back to this term Kabbalah, is Kabbalah something that was received, meaning, are the ideas of the Arizal something that went all the way back to Sinai? Or is it a chidush? Or is it both? And are we using language that is more subtle? We're not using language, we're not using normal language here. That's the part of the Zohar that's most intriguing. And if you look at it just in a sort of like, this means this and that means that, and you're not picking up the overall, we use language, we use writing, but there's so much that's unsaid. There's so much, especially about the world, especially about God. We talk about the name Yud Kei Vav Kei, but it's only like a minuscule of what we're really getting at. And I think that that's part of, so when you come as a rationalist, God gave us a brain. He and in Kabbalistic terms, there's Chachma, which is sort of like the creative capacity, and there's Bina, which is the analytic capacity. So we're meant to use these parts of our brain. We certainly use them in Talmud. We certainly use them in Halakha. In terms of Kabbalah, I think that a rationalist can come to this, but I think it's a new language that you have to learn. I think there's a lot that you can get out of it. You're talking about Chabad. I recently just started studying Torah Or of the Alter Rebbe. I would not have been able to understand a word of it if I hadn't already done this background preparation. Now that I understand,
That's why they do it.
right. So Chabad, Tanya, the whole thing, it's applied Kabbalah. Like if you know Kabbalah, it's like, but it's like if you don't know Kabbalah, how do you understand what the Alter Rebbe is talking about in the Tanya? And the same goes, for.
That's why he has the Gemma.
So
And nobody learns.
right. So Chabad is its own sort of like, and the Chassidut and the Baal Shem Tov, and it's its own sort of taking the Kabbalah of the Arizal and the Kabbalah of Tzfat, and all of this, we pray, will be part of what brings us to Yemot HaMashiach and the return of Nevuah. The Nazir at the end, he talks about, it's worth reading from, to where he talks about. Let me see if I can find it. His lines about I should have made a note of it. Yeah, I missed it. I should have made a note of it. But anyway, he has a very beautiful statement about the return of Nevuah, and that we pray for it, and that's part of. It's not just that we're returned to Eretz Yisrael. It's not just that that we come back or that we want Mashiach, but that we want Ruach Hashem.
No,
We want.
will get that.
Yeah, and that's the prophet
in
Yoel.
Tanakh.
That it will happen. How it will happen is a good question. I think that studying these things is beginning to walk down those paths. At least understanding. Well, this is what this group of people think. This is how it's going to work. There's a section. There's a Rabbi Avraham Abulafia Kabbalah Nevu'it, which is not connected to the Zohar. He's contemporary or whatever. But there are different types of Kabbalah, and how prophecy will work, I don't know. But I think it's okay to ask questions. But it's also at the same time, like, sometimes we just have to receive and accept that what we receive we may not understand. And later on, maybe we'll understand it a little bit deeper and deeper. Okay, any questions? That's it?
How can you say that how do you have like family members who are now learning about like what that you're trying to learn Kabbalah and stuff like that? How do they react to it? Because you come from a humanity background.
My wife is an arch rationalist. She says she has radar for Avodah Zarah.
But you haven't broken up the marriage.
No, she's like, hold off, we're not making any golems. That's number one.
What about what you teach your kids?
So there's a concept called nefesh, ruach, and neshama, and then chai on yechida. It's called naran chai. So I taught my daughter this Kabbalistic concept that nefesh is, Rabbi Kaplan uses this example. It's like a balloon. The nefesh is when the spirit is at rest. Ruach is when you feel it moving, and neshama, I should say the other side. Neshama is when it comes from inside your lungs. Ruach is when it goes out, and nefesh is when it rests. So, like if you take the example of blowing up a balloon, it's coming from inside of you. That's your neshama. Mm-hmm. When you feel it moving through the balloon, that's the ruach, and then when it rests in the balloon, that's the nefesh. Okay, so the neshama is the source of the life. The ruach is that feeling of it moving, and the nefesh is sort of is considered the lowest level, meaning that's all living things have a nefesh at some level. So I taught that to my daughter when she was about 6 or 7 years old, and she's like, "Oh, okay, I get that."
No, it is.
Right.
I understand that.
Because you're dealing. She's like, "Well," she said to me, "Hashem is translucent." Because she's trying to understand. Well, I can't see him. She's like, "Oh, he's translucent." Oh, okay. Like,
you can't see him. She's right.
Right, but this idea is something. There's something there that exists that I cannot see. So I said to her, "Did you see that?" And so then we talked about different levels. So I think you can even little simple things. What else did I teach her? I taught her the concept of Ein Sof. I taught her. She's now learning decimals in school. So now she's actually learning that 1 divided by 3 is 3.33. It goes on forever. So I taught her that when she was 6, because I wanted her to understand this concept of the infinite.
But what about what your wife says?
She's coming along. She thinks that like the fact that I'm keeping my that I'm not going crazy, that I'm keeping the rationalist side, that I'm asking questions, that I'm not going crazy, I'm not dying, I'm not I'm not becoming a heretic.
What about Eretz money heritage?
That's a better question.
That's what I originally was asking.
The Ammonite stuff. Yeah. I'll answer that offline. All right. Any other question? Yes.
Sorry, again, who is Sefer HaBahir attributed to?
Rabbi Nechunya ben Akana. The Sefer HaBahir it talks about it, the opening statement is attributed to Rabbi Nechunya ben Akana, who is one of the Tanaim. And it's often referred to in I think Ramban refers to it as Midrash Rabbi Nechunya ben Akana. He was one of the students, I think, of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Again, so like a lot of these traditions, especially these esoteric texts, like it's quite possible that they really, really are ancient because nobody understands what they were talking about. They were written in a cryptic manner and they were literally passed around from closed circles to closed circles. So the truth of the matter is we really just don't know. And that's kind of what makes it cool. But if you keep an open mind, but also with a critical capacity, you can get a lot out of this. That's been my experience, in my opinion. We're good? All right. Thank you to all of you out there.